I might.
I'd like one too if you do.
I might. Let me look.
I have a cough drop.
Yes, they don't. You're
I
over
have
there.
2 empty boxes. No, I'm not making this up. I really do. They're 2 empty ones.
Do you want to see what I bought for myself?
I think I'll throw them away now.
All where you put the X.
Buy that?
So I have cough drops. That's all.
Nah, it's okay.
I have cough drops.
What do you need, Anthony?
That's an Altoid. Chris is carrying
I
around
was
empty
just
containers.
tempting him.
Here.
Student council in 8th grade. Which was
Good evening. I'm calling to order this special meeting of the Douglas County School District Board meeting on May 1st at 5:30. We will begin with roll call. Director Chancho Shore.
Here.
Graziano. Here. Holtzman.
Here.
Lemieux.
Here.
Lung is not here, but we expect him at any time. Ray is here, and Vogel.
Here.
Please join me for the Pledge of Allegiance. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
For our public sake, this is a special meeting of the board that we can call at any time, and certainly we are able to make decisions in this format as well. So it's not a work session, it's not a regular meeting, but it is a special board meeting where we will be focusing on one topic and one topic only, and that is staff compensation for the 2018-2019 school year. So with that, I need a motion to accept the agenda.
Move to accept the agenda.
Motion made by Vogel.
Second.
Seconded by Holtzman. Any further discussion? Seeing none. Chancho Shore.
Aye.
Graziano. Aye. Holtzman.
Aye.
Lemieux.
Aye.
Ray, aye, and Vogel.
Aye.
Okay. For this particular meeting, we do invite public comment specific to tonight's agenda regarding employee compensation. Of course, the board would always like for discourse that occurs in this room to occur in an atmosphere of mutual respect. Everyone in this room plays an important part in modeling appropriate behavior and providing that climate of mutual respect. Each speaker tonight will be allotted up to 3 minutes to address the board. Please know that this is our time to listen, and therefore an immediate response will not be given. However, we will take your concerns seriously, and we will do everything to integrate your questions asked and or feedback that you make into our discussion tonight. To help us maximize our time, I will call both names, the person to speak, as well as the person that comes afterwards. And if you both would come forward to the front row, we'd appreciate it. First person to speak is Mary Jo King, and after Mary Jo is Ryan Mamos. Good evening.
Many of you. Thank you for this.
And Mary Jo, we're going to check your mic real quick before you get started.
Hello. Does that work better?
You might have to lean.
Closer.
There, that's good. That's great.
Thank you for this opportunity. My name is Mary Jo King, and I teach at Franktown Elementary. I want to comment on the proposed raises and benefit changes. While I truly appreciate any proposed compensation increase, announcing it in the form of a sudden emergency doesn't instill confidence in this process. We were given almost no notice, and we had no time to research. We were not given anything in writing. Any questions that we asked were unanswerable because our principals didn't have background. I also understand the employee council was not involved in this decision. There was no transparency in this process. This does not inspire us to believe it's a good faith offer. Announcing random pay raises every now and then leads people to believe that compensating the employees is not a well thought out procedure, but one based on external pressures or random factors. From the beginning, teachers and staff have said they need stability and predictability in their wages. As you know, teachers and classified staff are circulating a petition to bring back collective bargaining to our district, something we had for almost 4 decades. It seems disingenuous that now that this grassroots effort has signed up thousands of people in our schools, we have emergency stand-up meetings in every school to hear about a surprise compensation increase. Your employees are well-educated people who can see through shallow rhetoric. We do understand motivation and political strategy. Indeed, many of us teach these things. It's vitally important that the board understands that the effort to bring back collective bargaining is not about compensation. Yes, compensation is part of it, but it's only one of many issues that would be addressed in a collective bargaining agreement. It's about respect. The most critical part is the other things addressed through collective bargaining, such as meaningful teacher voice, reestablishment of the sick bank, working conditions like guaranteed class size, supports for special students, and high-quality professional learning are all things that will help return Douglas County to its former greatness. The most frustrating thing for me today is that we haven't had a voice in the decision-making. I acknowledge that the district has financial challenges, both due to state underfunding and our inability to pass bond MLO ballot measures for so long. As you may be aware, several years ago, teachers and staff voted to accept a pay freeze. We are team players, and we want a district that invests in the classroom. However, according to the district's current audit, less than 49% of the budget is allocated to instructional services. When we had collective bargaining, it was over 53%. That concerns me. The proposed raise of 2.75% plus the 7.75% employee contribution to para just about keeps us even with the cost of living increase in Colorado. Through collaboration, if we were partners at the table again, I would trust that our negotiation team was intimately familiar with the budget, had provided their insight and experience, and that the best outcome had been achieved. Trust is truly important. Teachers started this grassroots effort to bring back collective bargaining. It's more about creating a better school district than it's about salaries or benefits. Our working conditions are our students' learning conditions. Let's work collaboratively to achieve the best possible results. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. King.
Yes.
No, I'm sorry. Thank you, Mrs. King. I said that really fast. And thank you for your dedication to our kids as well. Ryan Memos, and then after Ryan is Carrie Nyhof.
All right, so I'm a little nervous. I timed myself in front of the mirror. So I told my kids to do this, and I'm like, I'm 3 minutes and 30 seconds, so I don't know if I get to the last part. But so anyway, good evening. My name is Ryan Mimis, and I have been teaching in Douglas County School District for 12 years. I have 2 kids currently attending the school district. I truly appreciate the hard work and dedication of the current board in starting the recovery process to lift our district up from the damage done by the previous board. Many strategic moves have been made in an effort to improve culture, climate, and rigor of content in Douglas County. This paradigm shift has become increasingly evident inside our schools. These changes have taken a community to accomplish and are a positive impact of our combined efforts that I truly value. In my classroom, the success of students is not mine alone. It is the ongoing collaborative effort of the community and the parents, specialists, school, and district staff, the students, and myself. I believe that the school board is at a point that they cannot complete their vision of our district on their own. To continue to move forward, the staff needs a collective bargaining agreement. But before I explain my reasonings, I think it's important for you guys to know that I am a non-union member who believes in the power of communication and collaboration. The need for a CBA became glaringly obvious when an emergency staff meeting was called last Friday to gauge our feelings on the cost of living pay increase. This was an ineffective way to collaborate and communicate with staff. Effective collaboration is a continuation of and a transparent loop of communication. It is time for us to create a strong partnership between the Douglas County Federation and the school board, just like the partnership that I pride myself on creating within my classroom. Now I would like to address our current compensation system. On December 13th, the board presented a resolution that outlined a compensation system that included elements valued by the teachers and staff. I recognize the complexity of fixing this broken system that we are still operating in. However, I am frustrated with the lethargic pace by which this resolution is being implemented. The citizens of Douglas County voted in November on a measure that promised to address an external pay gap between Douglas County and the surrounding school districts, with the goal of hiring and retaining high-quality teachers, yet the gap continues to widen. With the new implementation timeframe, we continue to live in an inequitable system until the 2021 school year. The time to fix this problem is not in a year and a half. The time to fix this problem is now. The last issue that I would like to address, can I just get back to can I keep going?
Please
Thank
keep
you.
going.
The last issue that I would like to address is the sick bank. Many of you, while running for the board seat that can currently occupy, expressed your displeasure with the thousands of bank hours that were stolen from staff. This is why I don't understand the continued litigation and the thousands of dollars being spent to continue to fight against this unfair action. These are hours that we earn as employees, and we are the only district in the metro area that doesn't have this benefit. But I want to take the politics out of it, of the ongoing dispute. For me, as a coworker and a family man, the sick bank is about taking care of each other. It's about the power of being able to ensure colleagues who become family, who fall ill, is able to pay their bills and put food on the table for their family. It's about our culture. It's about creating a kind of environment that people are proud to work in. Thank you for hearing my concern.
Thank you, Mr. Mamis. And thank you also for your dedication to our students. Appreciate that. Carrie Nyhof, and after Carrie is Darcy Dion.
It's amazing how nervous teachers are when they have to talk in front of adults. My name is Carrie Nyhof, and I am a 5th grade teacher. Thank you for allowing me to speak. I am grateful for the consideration of a raise. I recognize that the mandatory stand-up meetings were an attempt to get feedback, and that there are meetings planned across the district where people will have the opportunity to provide input. I appreciate the sentiment behind these meetings. Unfortunately, we are not being heard. What my colleagues are saying is that we want to collaborate. We want to be a true part of the process, and we want collective bargaining. Feedback and input are something that customers are often asked to give, purportedly to make a business better. I want more. I want a real consequential voice when decisions are made that affect my students, my colleagues, and me. And I want all employees to have a final say, a vote in the decisions. If DCSD is going to compete with other districts in the metro area to attract and retain employees, there are multiple areas where we can improve. We know we have a long way to go to be able to compete with compensation, but there are other things that won't cost the district money or much money that make us competitive. The first of those, of course, is collective bargaining. Surrounding districts all have it, and we are at a disadvantage in hiring when we don't. Another thing our surrounding districts have that we don't is a sick leave bank. We want the dignity that comes from donating days to a shared bank that our colleagues can draw from if they are facing a serious illness or having a baby. I appreciate the 70% short-term disability, of course, but this is far inferior to a sick leave bank, and frankly misses the entire point of teachers coming together to help each other. We also need research-based professional development in order to be competitive with surrounding districts. These things and more can be provided through collective bargaining with the DCF. I've been a teacher in this district since 1995, and I've personally experienced the power of collaboration. We are better when we work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Nyhof. And also thank you for your years of service. Darcy Dion, and then after Darcy is Michael Agostino. I apologize if I'm Agostino. I know I should ask my Italian friend down here on the dais. We'll make sure we get that correct. Welcome, Darcy. Good evening.
Hi, happy May Day. My name is Darcy Dion, and I 100% believe in bringing a collective bargaining agreement back to Douglas County, and sooner than later. Why is Dr. Tucker and the board dragging their feet? I asked this exact question to Dr. Tucker a couple weeks ago. His answer was that this district needs to take time to recover from the last 7 years of the destruction that it encountered. I am a very proud member of the DCF union. I have been a driving force in educating the DCSD staff about the importance of a CBA being established. It is past due for Douglas County staff to have a voice in all the major decisions affecting the district. There are so many things I would like to see in a collective bargaining agreement, so I want to discuss a couple really important issues. Our class size is outrageous, which makes it unmanageable for us staff to assist, educate, and give equal attention to all students. Last year, I had 39 art students in one class. Let me repeat that number, 39 middle school artists in one class. That number is outrageous. Another very important topic, and obviously this affects me every day. We desperately need to address staff compensation. This is the time to do it. There is so much talk that teachers do and don't get paid adequately. We were informed that staff members will receive a 3.5 increase for the 2019-2020 school year. This is minus the 0.75 that goes to para. Then there is the cost of living, which is estimated to be around 2.7%. Let's do the math. That will give each Douglas County school staff members about 0.1%, if not less. Maybe this is the best our budget can do for us, but I definitely do not believe this is our best. But the reason is I do not really know because I did not have a seat at the table. If I could be a representative who could make decisions where I could help keep the students' best interests at heart at the table. Who knows, students better than teachers. A CBA would allow staff to have a voice with all the major decisions. Let's stop dragging our feet, and now let's start to create a much-needed collective bargain agreement. Dr. Tucker recently told me that his wife did not move with him to Colorado. He stated that the reason she stayed in Ohio was because she was making about $60,000 more there and had a CBA in her district. Why is it okay for his wife to want a CBA and have job security, but not Douglas County employees? It is no secret that staff in our district have been signing a petition to get a CBA. What does the CBA represent, this petition? It represents very unhappy district staff. Compensation, 1% compensation increase and 39 teenagers in my art room is outrageous. This is a dire time in Douglas County. So Dr. Tucker and the board, us union members, and the entire staff hope you hear our disappointment, frustration, and urgency to make a CBA. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Diano, and also thank you for your work with our children. Appreciate that. And now, Michael Augustino. And correct me if I am...
Augustino.
Augustino.
Very close. Good try.
All right.
Good evening. My name is Michael Augustino, and I teach AP World History at Legend High School, and I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight. I have worked at Legend High School for 4 years, and as an AP World History teacher, today is May Day, which is a celebration of labor and the working class across the globe. So it's appropriate that tonight I'd like to talk about collective bargaining. For over 40 years, the Douglas County School District and the Douglas County Federation set a standard of collaboration that was envied by neighboring districts across the nation. It was not unusual for invitations to arrive requesting representatives from both groups to co-present at conferences around the country. Why? Because the relationship that developed between DCSD and DCF through collective bargaining and collaborative decision-making created a destination district for both families and staff. In short, others wanted what we had. There were hundreds of applications for a single teaching position, and families chose to settle here because of the high-quality educational environments and exceptional student achievement. This remarkable partnership was even awarded a commendation by the U.S. Department of Education. What collective bargaining is really about is voice. We appreciate the raise and the brief opportunity for feedback. Input is not collaborative decision-making. We do not have a say and vote on what happens. We discuss, but we don't decide. Important things are done to us, not with us. When we collectively bargained, we understood the financial situation in the district and ultimately determined together how funding would be spent regarding compensation, benefits, and more. Please be clear, we appreciate the raise and improvement in the short-term disability program as well as the snow days for classified employees, but we had no voice in the distribution of the funds available or in the decision-making process. Collective bargaining is much bigger than raises and benefits. It addresses working conditions and issues that impact employees across the district. The district, in tandem with DCF, addressed topics such as personal sick leave, planning time, progressive discipline, extra duty pay, and the evaluation tool. When we have collective bargaining decisions, we have ownership and the results are ours, not yours, together. Collective bargaining is about culture, morale, retention, respect, and most importantly, about the students in the district. Collective bargaining and working together is what took DCSD from a few schools to a thriving destination district that was the envy of districts across the nation. We feel this isn't just something we need, it's something we deserve. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Augustino. And again, thank you for your work with our students as well. That brings to close our public comments session tonight. I just want to thank all our public commenters. As I said earlier, we certainly will take your thoughts into consideration and hopefully incorporate those into our discussion tonight. So thank you for stepping forward and speaking with us tonight. Next on our agenda is now the presentation for staff compensation for the 2019-20 school year. I believe Chief Financial Officer Scott Smith and are you being assisted by Assistant Superintendent Ted Knight and Compensation Specialist Mary Chesla. Welcome.
Board members are a couple of the folks that will be chiming in and adding to the discourse tonight as well.
This is the beginning team, and there's a few backup.
Yes.
All right. We'll look forward to hearing your presentation.
Good evening, directors. We are excited to present our compensation recommendation for the 1920 school year. Our recommendation is to provide all staff a 3.5% raise, an ongoing raise that is in addition to the raises given last year in June and the raises from the mill levy override in December. So this would be on top of all of that. This costs our district approximately $12.9 million. I do want to point out the reason that this number was settled on was that this is the amount that we can give without dipping into our reserves to provide ongoing pay increases. If this presentation would have been 2 weeks ago, the number would have been 3%, because over the last 2 weeks, school finance has improved. There's been more funding for school districts. The negative factor has gotten boughten down more, a bunch of changes at the legislature. So that is the math of how we arrived at the number. It was not meant to be, as many people have stated, to cover inflation and para. We want to make sure that our employees don't have either an effective cut to their pay through inflation or a real cut to their pay. But like I said, if we were here 2 weeks ago, that would have been our recommendation because that is what the budget can sustain. Raises will not be differentiated by evaluation, so it would be for all staff at a 3.5% raise. And the reason we're recommending that is that the compensation work that's going on right now with all the changes we've made to pay and all the changes that are coming into the future, We want to make sure that we recognize our staff, provide them a meaningful raise, but also not exacerbate the problems that have been created over the last 7 or 8 years. We want to make sure that we, as I mentioned, recognize our staff, but that our compensation work going forward isn't impacted by our recommendation today. One thing I do want to talk about is, why isn't this number bigger? That's a lot of feedback that we got. And I put slides in the appendix that I'm going to flip to, but I think it's important to talk about now, because we would all love for this number to be bigger. So I will come back to the beginning, but these are the main reasons why. We are essentially a declining enrollment school district from a district-run perspective. The state of Colorado school finance formula recognizes declining enrollment school districts, and actually there's a funding formula change in order to smooth that out. The reality, though, is that as a district, we are not declining. We are flat to up in most years. It is the district-run aspect that is declining. And we have declined approximately 3,500 students in our district-run schools over the last 5 years. And I've mentioned this before, at roughly $7,000 a student, it's closer to $8,000 now. It was less than $7,000 at the beginning of this chart. That's $25 million of revenue that we have had to cut from our district. So this is the reality that we're living in. When we're funded on a per pupil basis and our pupils are declining, those are budget reductions that we have to absorb every single year. The other side of it is school finance, and specifically mill levy overrides. And I'll pick on our friends to the north, and not to pick on them, but to use them as an example. Their mill levy override is tied to total program funding. So as total program increases, their mill levy override increases as well. This year, we have 3 things that widen the gap between us and our neighbors to the north. The first is that their enrollment is projected to increase, while our enrollment in a neighborhood perspective is expected to decrease by almost 600 students. The second piece to that is, just like us, per pupil revenue is going up. So those are 2 big components to total program. The third piece is the interesting way that full-day kindergarten plays into this. In this number, in prior years, full-day kindergartners were 0.58. They are now 1.0. Funded pupil count grows again. So there are 3 factors that are driving an increase in total program that in turn drives an increase in mill levy override funding. So these things are just realities of where we're at, and when we see comparisons to neighboring districts, especially those who are either growing in enrollment or have tied their mill levy overrides to total program funding, it leads to the disparity in funding that we have. We took a huge step forward with 5A. We would be having a completely different conversation today if 5A wouldn't have passed. And we are incredibly grateful to our community that that happened. And we took a big step forward, and it's incredibly impactful to our staff, to our students, and we can't thank our community enough. But the fact still remains, we have a fixed dollar amount mill levy override at 13% of total program. Many of our neighboring districts are tied to total program at 25%, right? It's just the reality of the funding situation. When we talk about this chart, there's another aspect that matters here. When enrollment shifts or enrollment gains are disproportionately in our charter schools, we share more of our mill levy override because it's done on a 100% equal per pupil basis. So while we have a fixed dollar amount, if there is more enrollment growth at our charter schools than enrollment growth at our neighborhood schools, we actually have to cut our budget because the share of mill levy override shifts because it's on a per student basis. So those are some of the overlying questions of why 3.5%, why not more? But that is the math behind how we get there. In terms of benefits, for the 6th year in a row, no other district has come close to this. We are recommending that we absorb all medical and dental premium increases. And the reason we can do this largely is because we operate a self-insured plan, and we have had 2 really good claims years the last 2 years. So I'm going to knock on wood that continues again. And it's a tribute to our employees. They're staying healthy, they're taking care of themselves, they're making decisions about their health. But because we've had 2 really good claims years, we can absorb next year without needing to take it out of new revenue. We have the ability to use those savings and apply them back to our employees and make sure that they don't have to see their premium increases. So we can absorb that $1.3 million within the district. Previously, our short-term disability plan, every employee was covered up to 50%, and then you could buy up to 70%. And that 70% is not taxed. So if you pull short-term disability, it's 70% of your gross salary that's not taxed because it's an insurance benefit. We are eliminating the buy-up and covering all of our employees at 70%. We're also enhancing some of our dental benefits that'll impact a lot of our employees. And then the last piece, we are not unique in this. Every single school district has to deal with this, but per state law last year, there's an increase on the employer side as well, but that is $800,000 we have to commit to para on an ongoing basis for the 0.25% increase to the employer share. So we will now be at 20.4% of employee salaries from the employer, and next year our employees will be at 8.75% of their salary with that 0.75% increase. So all in, our total compensation and benefits recommendation is just under $15.5 million that we would recommend putting in to staff compensation going into the 1920 school year. With that, I'd like to turn over to Assistant Superintendent Knight.
Thank you, Scott. Mary and I are going to talk a little bit about the feedback that we gathered last Friday. So we went out to all of our employee groups, held meetings at every school, held meetings with every department, talked with employee council. All in all, 100% of our schools, 100% of our departments had a conversation about the proposal. As you can see here, nearly 60% of our schools and departments were supportive of this proposal. 17% were neutral. 11% did not support the proposal, and 14% gave us feedback that said weren't really able to ascertain where a majority of either their teachers or the folks in their department were. Again, this was all done last Friday in an effort to see where our folks were in terms of the 3.5% flat raise, the short-term disability 70% proposal, as well as the no increase to premiums. Mary's going to go through just a few of the specific examples, and then I'm going to talk through a few more of the themes that we saw.
Good evening. So I'm here to share some of the feedback that was heard at the stand-up meetings that occurred across the district on Friday. I'm not going to read every item to you. I'll give you time to read them yourselves, but I'll point out a few of the highlights. On this slide, to me, it really rang that there was a positive feeling overall and that the district is moving in the right direction in terms of pay. That was heard from one of our employees at an elementary school. I'll give you a minute to look at those others. Move to the next. We have multiple slides of feedback. On this slide, we heard that the staff is very grateful and that this feels like transparency, also from an elementary school. Next, on this one, we heard that overall people were pleased and surprised at the information. And the one at the top, thanks for keeping it the same for everyone without the differentiation among employee groups. And there was some additional feedback. We heard that it seems like it's only the cost of living, and after the increase in cost of living, this doesn't seem like much of a raise. And we also heard some feedback that asked, what is the incentive for excellence? And shouldn't it be more of an increase? And Ted can talk to you about the themes that we heard overall.
So in addition to feedback specifically on the proposal, there were also a few other themes that we heard, and I apologize, I'm going to use my notes because we got a lot of feedback here. Collective bargaining, as we heard tonight, was something that we heard come up in multiple schools. There were questions around short-term disability, mainly if the district's providing 70, can we buy up even higher? As CFO Smith mentioned, 70% without taxes gets most of our employees very close to their full salary. Suggestions on the new pay structure or compensation work, lots of questions around longevity pay, what Schedule A might look like in the future, extra pay incentive for highly effective, is that going to come back? Pay compression, gaps, those areas. Para questions, there were some questions about, is this the last increase we'll see? Are there more coming? Areas like that. We had questions about the sick leave bank and where we are we bringing that back? Is the STDI meant to replace that? Transcript questions, specifically, what are we doing with them? What kind of credit will be considered? Questions around school finance and a better understanding of PPR and how our decisions were made in relation to the state budget. The evaluation process, a couple questions around highly effective ratings, again, kind of pay for performance type issues, and the MLO, the perception that the passing of the MLO would have fixed all of our compensation issues and made us externally competitive. And then finally, as we communicated out this week, the snow day pay for classified was also asked as well. So again, some of the themes that our district leaders as well as principals received in addition to feedback on the specific proposal. And I'm going to call up Scott one more time to conclude our formal presentation.
Thank you. So, directors, based on school finance, the math of the budget, excuse me, and the feedback that we received, our recommendation remains that we provide a 3.5% flat increase for all employees on an ongoing basis, absorb the health, medical, and dental premium increases, enhance some of our other benefits, and obviously we have to absorb the para rate like all of the other school districts as well, but that is a component of compensation, so we wanted to highlight it here, but obviously we don't have any flexibility in that. With that, I'm happy to take any questions. I know my colleagues are as well. And Dr. Tucker has something to add.
Dr. Tucker?
Yes, directors and guests here, in addition to these stand-up meetings, and I wouldn't necessarily call them emergency meetings, they were input meetings. I also want to remind everyone, in March and April, I conducted regional meetings at Copper Mesa, Sierra, Rock Canyon, and Castle Rock Middle School, schools in each of our feeder areas, to get staff input, both classified and certified, along with administrative staff input on a sundry of things, including and not limited to compensation. So, and we'll continue to have these meetings throughout this year and into next year. This is not a one-shot deal here. We do value our employees. I understand your rationale in wanting a CBA. That has not fallen on deaf ears. But again, a one-shot meeting would not be an accurate description of our intent to get feedback. This has been ongoing all year long. Also, you may recall, even early in the year, along with HR department, we had town hall meetings to talk about raises at that time. And so this is our beginning stages, our maiden voyages, and sure, we can always do better. But please don't think this is just a one-shot way of getting input from staff. We'll continue for the rest of this year. Starting in June, I'll have my weekly Friday coffee chats to discuss items in addition to salary and benefits. We also want to talk about how we can be better collaborators. We also want to talk about how we can improve conditions here in the Douglas County School Districts, because if our support staff members are happy and our teachers are happy, we're going to have happy kids and happy parents.
Thank you, Dr. Tucker. And thank you, staff, again, for a very concise presentation and a rationale for the recommendations. Board directors, at this time, are there questions regarding the presentation, things that you're wondering about that our staff can answer? I'd like us to just continue on with the whole communication piece that Dr. Tucker started. We certainly heard tonight, and we've heard even outside of this room, that notion of input versus collaboration. And it's unfortunate, I know that Chief Human Resource Officer Amanda Thompson couldn't be here. I think she had a out-of-town engagement. But is there someone that can summarize, when you think about that, input versus collaboration? What can you tell us in terms of what happened? What strategies did we use? We certainly heard we had these staff meetings on Friday, and then we were asking for input. But I guess the question we heard tonight is there's a difference between collaboration and input. So I just would like staff to maybe comment on that a little bit.
Sure. And a piece that's also missing is the expanded employee council. And input and collaboration both came from the employee council. And I also want to put this out here so that we don't make any mistake about this, is that we have a smaller group of union staff who are a lot smarter than I am and a lot smarter than, and I'll speak for all the other administrators on employee council, helping us with a more predictable pay schedule as encompassed in the board's resolution. There has been some work done with that. As a matter of fact, at the last employee council meeting, that was shared with all 40-plus members of the employee council. Secondly, when you really talk about input versus collaboration, collaboration has a connotation mutually, you've arrived at this decision together, you've arrived at the decision in a very democratic way. And as some of our speakers have mentioned, that we don't have a collective bargaining agreement. A collective bargaining agreement gives rise to that. And I've also said, I want to emphasize this again, in collaboration. Life, in many aspects, would be a lot easier if we had a CBA. And I think I've also said that to folks. And again, it was mentioned, and I don't want to make this personal, but I will say this. My wife is in a district that has a CBA that's always been there, and she's 4 years from retirement and is not interested in getting a $60,000 pay cut. But with that being said, in a CBA environment, there is a mutual agreement where administrators and staff on this team come together. We're trying to get very close to that. And as I also said, for 12 years, we've been in a system that's been destroyed. We're not going to get there in 1 year. There's no Messiah, and there's no disrespect. There's no Messiah or anything like that that's going to get us where we need to be in 1 year. So I'll ask again for folks, please demonstrate some patience. There is no ill will on behalf of this board here. These are 7 of America's heroes who are out every day trying to save public education. And so we're going to get there. There's no ill intent on behalf of administrators not to collaborate. But again, we have to create the conditions where there's mutual participation, there's a mutual understanding that we will arrive at a decision where both quote-unquote management, administration, and our staff come together. That is encapsulated in a CBA. We don't have that now. But it does not mean we don't want input and we don't want to collaborate.
So if I might just capture that a little bit, Dr. Tucker. So it sounds like that we're amping up to a desired state for what collaboration should look like. I think what I hear you saying is that this recommendation that we've come to probably was more heavier on input feedback, whereas as we look forward to a new compensation structure, we really do see us amping up the collaboration piece where it is a mutually decided recommendation as opposed to simply reacting to a staff recommendation.
Yes, President Ray, you said it more eloquently than I could. And I think the best example is what we're coming up with, what we are devising with the expanded employee council and that smaller group. And again, there was a small, with our consultant too. I mean, I don't want to miss out on thanking our consultant along this way. This is new for a lot of us. It's new for people who are on the employee council, and for that smaller group of really smart people who are putting together this this more predictable salary schedule, if you will. And so, yes, we are moving in that direction. And again, we're taking these steps here, and it's something new, but I can say to our friends out there, it's something we're dedicated to coming to a point where people will feel like they're being heard and that their opinions do matter, and we're actually collaborating.
Thank you, sir. Other questions? Do you want to follow up on that, Director Vogel? Please, Director Vogel, and then Director Lemieux.
So I don't have questions. I just wanted to elaborate on that a little bit further. You know, we have to operate within our current reality. And we, like Dr. Tucker said, in a lot of ways, a collective bargaining agreement would make this process easier, but it's not the reality that we're in right now. We have a budget that we have to pass, and we have to make all these decisions based in our current reality. And I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, we're doing this conversation earlier in the year than what we usually do, and that was because the board was pushing to say we wanted the staff to have their contracts with a salary attached to it. So we didn't like in the past how contracts were signed without a dollar amount attached to it. And so we pushed staff to say, hey, we want to get this going so that people know what they can expect in the next year. And I think that's kind of exacerbated some of the issue, because we've felt like, I think staff probably felt like they had to do this in a quick fashion, and in a massive district that we are, that's a hard thing to do. I think that I would just like to say that this board unequivocally is about doing what's right for everybody in our school district. And, we value equity, we value collaboration with everybody. We value being able to get input from folks, and we're not going to sit up here and make decisions unilaterally. That's not what any of us are about. And so I just felt like those are really important things to share, and we're going to get there. We will get there, I promise.
The directors and Director Lemieux is next on the floor, but I want us to hold back with our discussion and our comments until we've had questions answered by our staff. So if we could stick with questions for the next few minutes, and then we can engage into some comments and discussion. Director Lemieux.
I have a lot of questions, and I submitted them about a few days ago, and I also said that I would ask them publicly. So anything I say right now, you're not going to be blindsided by. You know these are coming. Part of that collaborative piece that I was expecting, and I think that this is something that we need to define as a board when we ask for feedback, that doesn't mean after staff has made the decision. That means the feedback starts in the beginning. So you guys sent us a great email that said we have these 4 options. And my expectation was those 4 options would go to the employee council, and the employee council would put their input, their thoughts, go back to their schools, get information, and then work with the staff to bring a recommendation to us. And so since that didn't happen, and we've called this special session, I think we have an excellent opportunity to discuss the other 3 options that staff didn't choose, since nobody had the opportunity to see those, other than the board in a memo and then the recommendation that came to us. So could anybody, I don't care who it is, Dr. Tucker, somebody from staff, discuss the other 3 options and tell us the pros and cons of those and why you didn't choose those over this one, please. Thank you.
Absolutely. So I'm going to do my best to pinch hit for Ms. Thompson a little bit here. But the 4 options, in essence, were the first one that we recommended, a flat percentage increase across all employees. The second option was a flat percentage increase for all employees within a particular group of employees. So for instance, you could give 1% to teachers and a different percentage to classified staff. Our third option was provide a flat dollar amount to all employees across the system. And then in the same idea, the fourth would be a flat dollar amount for each employee within an employee group. I think the biggest thing of where we landed on our recommendation is that we got a lot of feedback from classified staff that when raises were differentiated by employee group, that made them feel undervalued. And we want to make sure that as we are working towards our compensation changes that are coming, they are coming in 2021, that we recognize all staff. We also want to make sure that with inflation increasing and the para rate increasing, that if 3.5% is what the budget can afford, if we don't give 3.5% to all employees, they either have an effective cut to pay through inflation or they have an actual cut to pay because they can't cover the para increase. So from a percentage standpoint, that's why we recommended the flat percentage across all the employee groups instead of flat percentage by each employee group. Obviously, the pros of that are you could differentiate by different groups, and you have the same raise within each group. So you still do recognize some compensation differences, but you treat everyone the same within each group. If you do a percentage by each group, you don't treat everyone the same. I think the other thing that we recognize is that the staff that's been here longer receives a smaller raise. I'm sorry, I'm jumping ahead. When we go to the flat dollar amount, the number 3, if you give a flat dollar amount, the staff that's been here longer gets a smaller effective raise on a percentage basis than our newer staff. And I know we've heard a lot about compression, about new employees coming in, making the same amount or more than people who have many, many years of experience. This recommendation is not meant to rectify the pay gaps. It is not meant to solve our compensation problems, but it is definitely designed to not make them worse. And so we wanted to make sure that as we looked at a flat dollar amount, yes, it does reduce the variability between different staff members and how much they get in a dollar amount, but it also treats all staff, whether they have been here for 1 year or for 30 years, they get the exact same raise. And we wanted to make sure that we didn't compound the problems related to our pay gaps and that people coming in, as I mentioned, making at or more than people who have been here for a long time with similar levels of education and those types of things. So we tried to strive to find something that was easily understandable by all groups, something that was equitably applied to all groups, and as I mentioned before, something that gives a raise to our employees, but also gives us time to develop the correct compensation system and not throw another wrench in that's going to make it more difficult to fix going into the future.
Good. Dr. Lemieux?
Again, we have seen this information. Some of the feedback was it's very hard for people to have an understanding and a concept of why you made this decision. Is there any way as we go forward with this compensation, we can say these were the 4 that were identified of possibilities, this is the one we landed on, and here's why, so that because we missed the boat on the front end, can we at least share this information on the back end?
Now, I do want to emphasize when principals had their stand-up meeting, their letter explained why the 3.5 was desirable for the very reasons that Scott just articulated, because we wanted to make sure again, and I don't want to repeat the things that Scott has just laid out, we don't want people, if we differentiate, it would end up with some people taking, in essence, a pay cut because of the increase in cost of living and the para. So the letter, the communication that principals and directors shared with their staff should have explained that.
No. That wasn't my question, though.
No,
my
I know.
question was,
but I want to clear.
Can we let everybody see? Because I think the thing is, we're really working hard on trust, and our staff did an incredible job of listening to feedback from what happened through the MLO, and they applied that to what we are being able to do with this 3rd raise in 2 years, which. That is a huge celebration. I'm so excited that we get to do that. And you guys actually listened to feedback and put it in here. And again, I think the only thing that we are on a constant loop about is communication, and that we had a difficult time communicating the 4 options and why they chose this option. And it might be surprising that if people knew the 4 options, and this is staff recommendation, and here's why, we might have way higher than 58% agreeing with it. We might have 100% going, yeah, of the 4 options and of our budgetary constraints, we actually agree with that, and it wouldn't be a negative, and we wouldn't have people coming up here and being very upset about it. They would be celebrating it along with us. So, because I'm celebrating this, and I'm celebrating the hard work that went into it, but I got to see the hard work. And I want the rest of our 80, 800 and, less the however many of you guys worked on this. I mean, we have 8,000 employees that have no clue how much work went into this, and that how much feedback that you guys listened to put into this. So
The question is,
Yes.
can we
can
communicate the other three
we
options?
articulate that?
Not only can we will do so, but I won't belabor this, the rationale for the 3-5 was given. There was not a rationale for the other three options, but not only can we will certainly do so.
Very good.
Well, and I'm sorry.
Right.
Yeah.
Finish?
So there is rationale in the bullet points of the 4 options and the one that was chosen. So I think that will help people understand.
Absolutely.
So that's awesome. So thank you. I appreciate that.
Director Lemieux, can I get Director
Yes.
Holtzman in with a question, then we'll come back to you if you have, or
Yeah,
if you
'cause
have questions on the same line of topic.
I have 10.
Okay, so if we could just kind of share the dais a little bit. Director Holtzman?
All right.
I just wanted to ask some questions before we get too far away from just this whole process of communicating and working towards collaboration, because I do have some specific questions about the actual financial presentation. But what I will say is the presentation that you all just gave, I think, is a great level of detail. I appreciate all the explanation that you gave us, Mr. Smith. But what I'm wondering is, was that same level of detail shared with the principals who then shared it with their schools? And is that the process we're planning to use as we go forward, or are we going to use that in conjunction with the employee council? Because it's my understanding the employee council, I think part of the explanation that I was given was there were 2 snow days or at least one that fell on an employee council day. But I'm not sure the employee council ever heard this information. So let me know if I'm wrong on that. And then just I just think it's important that we're transparent even about the communication process. Because, we've heard even tonight, and I've heard it before tonight, that the way we notified people about these meetings at their buildings was somewhat alarming. They didn't have information in writing before them. I think something like what you just gave us would have been very helpful for them and given them more time to look at it. So what did we do, and was it effective, and do you think we could possibly, what are some ideas for improving that? And I'm sorry that Ms. Thompson is not here because I feel like this is her question, but.
The question really is, was this detailed presentation given to all
So
staff?
I'll answer that. The short answer is no, it was not. And the honest answer is we can always do better. And I think as Dr. Tucker alluded to, we are making steps to change how this is done. I think anyone who's watched this in the past, raises were a complete black box that just appeared, and there was not really this level of specificity provided. I can own that this didn't go out. We're going to get better, and we're going to get more information out. We're going to get information out sooner. It's just part of the process as we change how we do business, how we collaborate, how we get information out. And so that is something that we can definitely work on going forward. The last piece I'll touch on is there was employee council on Monday night, I believe, and there was this discussion. Director of Budget Colleen Doan was there and did answer questions about the budget and walk through some of the budgetary realities of where we're at and how we got to this number. So some of that detail was shared with the employee council.
Directors, other questions? And I'll come back to Director Lemieux unless other directors have questions. Director Lemieux, back to you.
Thank you. So do you mind if I ask Colleen about what the recommendation from the employee council was then after you met on Monday?
Yeah. I don't know if I can actually speak to what the recommendation was. There was a lot of conversation from employee council. There were varying opinions amongst the members of the council. But it was mainly just a Q&A session asking a lot of really good questions. Mary Cheslow is also there, so I want to turn it over to her because I was more of just an observer and not an actual member of the council, so see if you have any.
So as we debriefed after the employee council to find out what the temperature in the room was, we decided that it was generally positive for the proposal. There were pockets of what I would call neutrality among some folks, and as Colleen said, there were some voices that were against the proposal. So overall, the employee council response pretty much matched percentage-wise what we saw from the district as a whole. And I can add a little bit about how the Employee Council brainstormed some future ideas for communication, if you'd like to hear. They were very creative. They were very interested in looking at other options than the communication avenues that we have used in the past. One of the things that they thought would be an interesting way to communicate quickly would be via your mobile devices, putting out messages on your cell phones with a special alert to let people know when things are out there and when we need to collect feedback. There was talk about podcasts. So that was another creative idea. We talked about doing some webinars or video-based communications as well, along with the emails that we do and the newsletters that go out. They expressed a strong desire to have emails be short, sweet, to the point. They don't want paragraphs full of information. They want bullet points. That was really enlightening to us as well. But overall, they were really very creative and very eager to find some positive ways to communicate in the future.
Director Vogel has a follow-up, and then back to Director Lemieux, and then Director Holtzman.
So what you just talked about with the whatever the number percentage from employee council that were not supportive of this compensation increase, and you said it mirrored what the rest of the staff looked like. What were some of the general ideas or reasons behind that for not being in support of it?
We heard similar feedback to what we presented tonight, the need or want for a CBA. For the folks that were against it, they wanted more collaboration. For the people that were in favor of the proposal, they liked that it was equal across all employee groups. They felt like 3.5% was better than last year's 3.2%, which only went to teachers. Some classified folks only got 2.8, so they felt the higher number was a better number this year overall. The neutral ones, neutral people are quiet. They don't tell you why, they won't give you an opinion.
Very good. Director Lemieux?
And I'm not sure if this is to staff or maybe for the board. Is it our expectation that on something that involves employees or will affect employees, that we actually get a recommendation from the employee council? I don't know why I was expecting an actual recommendation from the employee council. And I also feel like it would have been helpful to have this conversation with our DAC and also with our FOC. I at least sent it to my FOC, but they don't meet till tomorrow. So unless we put off a vote tonight, I won't be able to get their recommendation. So is that your understanding? I don't know why I thought we might get an actual recommendation.
Well, the Employee Council is the Superintendent's Council. It's not a board committee. So I would just clarify that.
Mm-hmm.
So we really, again, rely on our superintendent to be that pipeline of information for us regarding where staff are in terms of these recommendations. So I would say no, there was not an expectation that tonight we would get a recommendation from Employee Council. We really were looking for a recommendation from our superintendent, who has delegated it to these folks to give us the recommendation.
Okay. And so based on that, you feel like the recommendation overall, or the majority from the Employee Council, would be to support this recommendation that staff has put forth?
We saw more support than non-support, yes.
Very good. And then, but they have not seen the three other options, just this one staff recommendation. Okay, thank you.
Director Holtzman, did you have another question?
Well, I was going to transition into questions about the actual dollar amounts, unless somebody else has more process.
Director Chancho Shore?
The word that continues to permeate in this conversation is collaboration. And collaboration, I think I hear you say that that's a goal, that we're going to continue to work on understanding how and what we are going to do for collaborating with our teachers. And I know that, and our staff, I know that we have talked about processes, procedures, ways to communicate, ways to collaborate. I think my question really is, I'm hearing that, and I do believe that we've taken steps in the process. We've created some procedures. We have some systems that we now have in place for collaboration. I'm also hearing that none of us feel like we have quite enough processes for collaboration. So I think my question is, what will be the next steps in, and you don't have to answer it tonight, but I want it to be considered. It's what will be the next steps in creating purposeful collaboration throughout the next. Current state is we don't yet have enough collaboration. Desired state is we have collaboration and people feel collaborated with. So when will that occur, and what steps in a process will we put in place to assure that that's occurring? And I don't expect an answer tonight. I just am wanting to put that question into a process.
And anyone would like to give a quick response to that, or is that one you would prefer that we table for a future discussion? Dr. Tucker?
Oh, absolutely. And thanks for all the questions. It's an ongoing process. It's a process to develop trust. In order to have meaningful collaboration, you must have trust and you must have reciprocity. But at the more granular level, as we look at what is really not a dichotomy, because we've heard quite clearly that a CBA would give us the collaboration. And we don't have that. At the current state of affairs, we don't have that. And our employee council and that smaller council is advisory in nature. And there's no expectation at this time, it's advisory. And we're going to listen very carefully. And I hope that at a situation or system that a body that is advisory in nature is not seen or not viewed as non-collaborative. Okay? So we're going to continue to build that capacity of trust and reciprocity. But as the way things stand now, it's advisory in nature.
Follow-up, Director Chanchashore.
This is not a follow-up. This is a separate question. Things that make you go hum around here. We listened to the impact just now of charter schools and the impact it has on our schools and our neighborhood schools. And yet, the other committees, that CART review committee that comes to us and the recommendations to approve charter schools seem out of sync to me. So it's a question of process, and it's a question of working in tandem and riding the bicycle together. I know that there is, in the CART review process, a fiscal impact on the system, and I just want to emphasize that as we move forward, this has to be considered. These kinds of things that come up to us that have to do with what we're doing and making huge, gigantic budget decisions, we see the impact. So, I mean, the elephant in the room is, wow, the impact is pretty significant on our neighborhood schools. So as we're reviewing the CART, it impacts everything. So as we have a review process and CART recommendations that come to us to approve additional things, I'd really like that to be answered every time. So what's the fiscal impact in our employee pay? What's the impact in our PPR? I want those kinds of questions answered each time too.
So a future question for you is the CART process in terms of whether or not it is clearly telling us the impact when we consider those future charter school applications. Questions about the compensation proposal? Director Lung, was that a hand? Yes. Okay. You might want to get your microphone.
Well, I agree with my colleague that collaborations, trust, and transparency are very important aspect. Our school district has a very good relationships with different employee groups until recently when there's a big divisions because of political reasons. In fact, in 1994, our district, in conjunction with Dallas County Federations, developed an award-winning pay-for-performance system that was really, truly a pioneer for collaborations. So, unfortunately, with what happening in the last decade, that kind of trust has been breaking down, and that's why I think you hear all of those comment today. And I appreciate the recent reformulated employee council, but as Director Ray said, that this is a superintendent council. So to foster and rebuild the trust between, the board, which really damaged itself in the last decade by their actions with the employee, I was just wondering whether it would be appropriate to add some teacher members into the board committee, like in FOC, Long Range Planning Committee. Even DAC has 2 teachers, but we know that they were appointed, and in a way, some people don't feel that they truly represent the teacher's voice. Because when I was serving the DAC, the teacher is selected by their peers. So that's my question is, to foster better trust relationships, should the board committee have members from the classified employee or licensed employee so that the board and the board committee can hear their voice, so the voice can go to the board?
And certainly there are committees, so we can structure those however we desire. So I hear you advocating that we need to look for more teacher voice in our own board committees that would also indicate that desire of collaboration in those as well. Board directors, I am going to ask that we keep focused on the presentation so these folks don't have to stand for another 24 hours. Are there questions about the presentation or the proposal? So going back to Director Holtzman and then Director Lemieux.
So I have about 5 in a row that are kind of logically connected, but if you decide that you would like me to stop at any point, just let me know. And I did send these in advance. I reviewed the answers I got back today. And I didn't get an answer for all of my questions, so I'm not sure you'll have them tonight. Basically, I wanted to start with the reason that we wait every year to consider the budget at this time is because of the legislature. We need to know what the PPR is going to be, and so that's what we're generally waiting on. So it's my general impression that the large majority of the funds for this recommended increase in compensation and benefits comes from PPR. I am understanding, and I really just want to ask these questions so that everyone understands this. I'm also understanding that it's not just PPR funds that we're using, it's also other funds. So I wanted to give you an opportunity to kind of explain that, and what I'd really like is to know the percentage of so the increase in PPR is, I can find it here, 16.7 million. So I would like to know what percentage of that is going towards that in the increase in compensation recommendation, and then what other funds are being added to that, which ends up with the total of 15.4 million.
Thank you for the question. I apologize. I thought we answered all the questions that you had, so if I missed some, I do apologize. You are correct that per pupil revenue in aggregate for district-run operations is going to increase about $16.7 million. You're also correct that legislation is not finalized, but the legislative session ends in 2 days, and everything that we know is that there should be no further changes to school finance. So that's why it gives us comfort that we can make this recommendation now. Obviously, anything can happen, but of all the bills that are being talked about at the end of the session, school finance is not one for one of the first times in a long time that has been up for debate right at the end. I'll say to your question of what percentage of per pupil revenue, it's impossible for me to give you an answer on that because everything goes into the general fund. There's one pot of money. I can't delineate this much of raises is coming from this bucket, this much of raises is coming from that bucket. What I can say is that of all of the sources that we have for next year, we have the uses that go along with them. And all of this, again, this is a little bit out of order, as Director Vogel mentioned, is coming to the board on May 14th. It's actually going to the Fiscal Oversight Committee tomorrow so that they can provide feedback on this. So I'll walk through some of these, and everyone will get this detail, I promise. And we're still working on this. But the biggest thing is, so per pupil revenue coming in. And then that is offset by about $2 million by enrollment declines projected for next year. So that number would be bigger, but because we pass through some of the dollars from per pupil revenue, that reduction, some of that has already been borne by the schools. $2 million is the remainder that has to be borne by the district. In addition to that, as I mentioned before, because we've had 2 good claim years in our medical benefits claims, we're absorbing those costs within that medical fund that we have. And I've got all this written down here, so it's going to be hard for people to follow. But we have other increases in revenue as well, to the tune of what we're expecting of about $1.4 million. So specific ownership tax, which is the vehicle tag that you pay for, that continues to increase every year because thankfully people are buying more vehicles. During a recession, that does not happen. So we're expecting more of that. We've changed our interest and our investment policy here at the board to make sure that we are investing our cash and that our taxpayer resources, again, safety of principal is number 1, liquidity is second, and then return is third. We are doing that, so we're seeing more and more interest revenue coming in. That's something the Fiscal Oversight Committee has been heavily involved in. We're continuing to rent our facilities as much as we can, get more facility use revenue. We have a bond this year, so we don't need to transfer as much money from the general fund into the capital projects fund. So I can save that money to put towards all of the cost increases to the tune of about $1.25 million. We also have talked about, so with our bond, one of the things we did, again, in collaboration with the Fiscal Oversight Committee, and this was talked about at the Mill Bond Oversight Committee, was refund one of our certificates of participation. So certificates of participation are like bonds, except they are not. They are sale leasebacks of your buildings. And so what happens is that you pay the interest and principal out of your general fund. And it's very common, very legal in the state of Colorado when you don't have voter approval for general obligation bonds to use certificates of participation. We used bond funds to buy back one of our schools, is what we did. And that is acquiring property, which is in line with the ballot question that we had written for 5B. The upside of that is we don't have to make the principal and interest payment on that COP anymore. So that saves the general fund about $1 million a year. There's also increased revenue coming for SPED Tier B from the state. We estimate that about $1 million. That will help to offset some of our costs. Right now, 70 cents of every dollar of special education expenditures are not funded by the state and federal government. We will have special education increases next year, so this will help cover some of that. It doesn't close the gap, but it is definitely something that we appreciate. And then, other miscellaneous things all in. So right now, we're estimating new sources of revenue and all those things at about $23 million. All of those changes going all in. And again, all this will be on a slide that people can walk through. I want the FOC's feedback is to make any tweaks, make this easier to understand. With that, the biggest expense is the $15.4 million for compensation. But then as we walked through at the April 16th board meeting when we sat and we did the work session on department increases, there's over $3 million going into transportation, hiring new employees internally, as well as the increased cost for third-party transportation that we're experiencing. There are increased costs with career and technical education as we expand concurrent enrollment opportunities. And this is not including the mill levy override. This is strictly our prior, trying to keep it apples to apples so that we don't mix the two together. We do have additional special education expenditures, both in transportation and just normal caseload growth. We also will detail this as separate on the mill levy. We're adding days to the calendar for our EA4s for additional professional development. We're also lowering the ratio for certified staff at moderate needs at the elementary school as well. That is coming out of the equitable funding pocket on the mill levy override. So that's separate, but want to make sure we mention that we are definitely investing more money into special education next year. About $1 million more into schools for more ESL staff. And also for resources that haven't been funded, alternative schools are included in that number as well. As you remember, we went through it. We have increases to the tune of about $900,000 in our property and liability insurance premiums. We also have, let's see here, implementation of full-day kindergarten. As I talked about with the board, we actually end up losing about $600,000 because of our demographic and the fact that our tuition charge was more than what 42% comes back from the state, so we have to absorb that. We have increased contractual costs that are multi-year contracts that have already been agreed to for inflation, so things around evening custodial, grounds, things that come out of operations and maintenance, required radon testing, exciting stuff, but things that we have to pay for, safety and security items. And then all of the other department increases that we talked about. Most of that is very, very small and targeted, that aligns with the board end statements, looking at things in curriculum, looking at things across the district that make sure we're supporting climate and culture, supporting our compensation work, all the stuff. If you go back for the public to watch the April 16th work session that was detailed on that massive spreadsheet, but hopefully the conversation was more useful. So I know that was a ton, and I have it in front of me here. And all this, I said, we'll go through May 14th so that everyone sees exactly every dollar coming in and every dollar going out.
Director Holtzman?
Thank you. That was very comprehensive. I really appreciate it. I only have 2 questions left because that answered a lot of them. And so I appreciate the presentation you gave us twice last meeting, actually, during the work session and during the board meeting, that explained some of the departmental changes. I'm really excited about transportation changes, and I'll quit giving a commentary, but I know that's coming up in our community conversations a lot. The next question is, currently, I think we are at 85% of our budget goes for compensation.
That's correct.
Salary and benefits. So if we were to make this change, the 3.5% increase in salary wages plus the increase in improved benefits, would that percentage remain at 85%?
I can't give you a specific answer. I can run those numbers for you. If it does change, it's going to be minimal in the context of $500 million in the general fund. You know, total compensation right now is running about $370 million. You know, and I'm rounding numbers here, so someone cranks that out and says it doesn't exactly add up. We're going to add more money into compensation. We're obviously adding more people in transportation and those types of things, but it's not going to move that drastically either way just because the denominator is so large. It's going to be largely consistent, but we can definitely run that math and bring it for May 14th if you would like.
And then I guess just my other question, and it's almost rhetorical, but knowing that we're being asked to allocate this much to our students' most important resource, the people who work here, work for them, and you've explained a lot of the ways we're using the other portions of increase we have, whether that be gained through, you know, refinancing a COP or through the PPR increase or whatever way we got it. We've looked at most of those except for the increases to site-based budgets, but we know that there will be. Those are all going to students. But my final question really is, there are still, I can think of many needs of our students directly that won't be met through this. That if we put more money towards them, for instance, transportation. I've heard this in a couple of different community meetings this week. The outcry from our community, parents and students, the importance of activity buses for them, and it's an equity piece for our students, and we're hearing it very loudly. And the amount of money that we are able to give for next year's budget isn't going to fix that. So I just kind of wanted to point out that there are still many unmet equitable needs for our students that won't be met if we make this decision. So
I absolutely agree. And the only thing I'd add to that is, if you recall, the mill levy, we have set aside money for more equitable funding. We made it clear, we put all that money into schools this year, but we made it clear to schools, count on that being one time, because we need to do this strategically. We also saw that a theme coming out of the strategic plan is equitable distribution of resources. So we know it's there. We're not going to get there even if we change how we do funding and budget and those things. Without a drastic change in funding from the state, that's not going to happen overnight, and there will still be unmet needs going into the future.
Very good. Director Lemieux, you have other questions? Oh, I'm sorry. And then Director Lung after Director Lemieux.
Thank you very much. I have a few. Would you like me to
You just
do
maybe
one?
give a couple and then, yeah.
Okay. So we heard tonight that there is more money that is going to go and be allocated, because what percent of what we are getting in addition from the state is going to compensation? I heard a number of 92%. So of what we're getting in addition this year, about 92% of that is going to go to compensation, and then the other 8 is going to be.
So I would not draw that math, because everything comes in and out of the
Because
general
it's
fund.
so many different
There's no way to tie
Okay.
specific expenditures to specific revenue, unless it, of course, is a grant or something that is direct line, but
Okay.
most of our funding is not that way.
Okay, thank you. Then I won't say that because I must have misunderstood. One of the things we talked about, high importance of, and it also helps our educators in the classroom, is the need for mild and moderate EAs. It is something that was cut Is that something that we're going to be able to offer our, we discussed EA4s, but those are SSN kids. What about our mild, moderate EAs? Are we returning that programming now that we do have some more funding in the bond and the MLO relief?
So there's two categories of EA4s. One are the center-based programs, EA4s. The other aspect is our student-specific EA4s. We have, when the EA3s that you're referring to went away about, I think it was in 2010, was about the time frame, the EA4 replaced it. So it was student-specific instead of general across the school. We have more EA4s now, student-specific EA4s, than we had EA3s when that was cut. So that change in program, we have more staff now in student-specific EA4s than we did previously in the old model of EA3s. So the money that we are investing in special education this year is professional development and lowering caseload growth, or lowering ratio for our moderate needs elementary schools.
Okay, so that'll be met. Oh,
So change of ratio for moderate needs students as opposed to restoring that EA3 category is,
so
I think, what I
it's gonna
heard.
stay in the EA4 house. Okay. And then the other one is this going to affect class sizes, or is that 100% site-based?
That is still site-based. I think the thing to remember is that what I talked about here was only the non-2018 mill levy. We put a lot of money into schools in a much more equitable fashion in trying to recognize schools that have programming challenges and also schools that have higher populations of free reduced lunch. We put more money in for all schools. I think this goes to the same idea of we still have a ways to go. The mill levy vastly went to compensation. We put more money into equity, put more money into career and tech ed. Huge step in the right direction that I can't say enough, that we're incredibly thankful for. This conversation would be so different if that didn't happen. But it is not going to be the silver bullet that solves all of the problems we have. So my anticipation would be that some schools are using that to lower class size. Some other schools are probably using it to add specials programming. It's really how they choose to use their money and prioritize it within their school community.
Dr. Tucker?
And Scott, how much money from, if you can help me remember, how much money did we devote from the MLO for equity? And Ponderosa High School, I don't know if we have anyone from Pondo. If you have a conversation with Tim Ottman, he and his staff are doing exactly what you're talking about in terms of using this money to reduce class size and create other opportunities for students.
So it was $7 million that we used in total to add to school funding. I think Ponderosa is a great example of where, in terms of equity, we actually went above and beyond in Ponderosa and gave them enough money to switch back to a 5 of 7 schedule so that they weren't the only high school running 6 of 8. That is outside the formula. That is through the highly impacted funding. That is something that we committed to a year or two ago that we were going to do, and we delivered on that this year.
Director Lung, and then Director Chanchashore, and then back to Director Lemieux.
So in the presentations, I see a lot of summary of the feedback. Will the entire feedback be available to the board member or to the public, to read without, of course, naming, who's saying that, or this is something that is for internal use only?
One of the big questions we heard over and over from Director Holtzman and Director Lemieux about a website and a website link for our employee council that will be posted there. And also, in fact, I had a conversation this afternoon with Amanda. She's on her way out west. Her grandmother passed away, so she's on her way out there to help with her grandmother's funeral arrangements. And we talked about putting this type of information on the link on the employee council site.
All right. Director Chanchashore.
You mentioned that the class size concern is addressed in an SBB in the school-based budget.
Yes.
So where do employees and parents address that issue in the schools? Through the SACs?
It needs to go through the principals, the SACs, the DOS, and Mr. Knight. Ted, would you speak to that?
Yeah, our main source of feedback there is every year our principals work with their SAC to identify what priorities they want new monies to go to or ongoing funds. In nearly every one of our schools, it's reduced class size, it's keeping our specials where they need to be. And so there's always that balance between keeping full-time specials and making sure that we have good class sizes. But a majority of that feedback comes straight from the SAC.
Director Chancha-Shore.
So where's the oversight? Is the oversight through the SAC?
So the oversight is mainly through our directors of schools. So our directors of schools go through each one of those budgets and sign off, if you will, on whether or not they're meeting those wishes of the community.
And then who reviews that in the school district?
I'm sorry?
Is there a school district personnel that has the responsibility of reviewing that? You said the director of schools.
Correct.
So they're the responsible party for a large class size if there's a concern or an issue.
Yeah, we use an example. We have a school in Highlands Ranch that every year the SAC says we would rather have high class sizes and more specials. The director of schools is the one that has the most knowledge of what each community really values, so they ensure that that budget meets the values of that community.
Director Holtzman and Director Lemieux.
So just a follow-up on Director Chancha-Shore's question, and not to back us into a corner, but I know that a part of what we've found out so far, the themes that have been coming in with the strategic plan feedback, one of those is autonomy in schools, the value that and the importance of that autonomy. And I'm wondering if, to me, things like class size, not just a gold standard in curriculum and instruction, that might be something that will emerge from a strategic plan. And I know that we don't know yet because we're not finished. But that does seem to kind of fit with that autonomy theme that has come out so far.
I certainly agree with you. A year ago or so when I decided to come here, and I said one of our big challenges, big opportunities would be for us to value the autonomy that happens in our building, and the autonomy comes from more than just the building principals, but also from the staff and from the SACs, with a very collaborative and a very strong central office oversight process where everyone is working together and we're tackling together issues of class sizes and programming. Unfortunately, early in the year, we saw where there was a desire to eliminate a program, and we all worked together to ensure that that wasn't going to happen. And then even just this week, there was a desire to increase a position, a part-time media position, and the staff of that particular building didn't think they had the money. So with the assistance of Ted and Scott, they helped this administrator and the staff see they had enough money and carryover to do that. So again, it gets back to the theme that the board is saying again, collaboration, communication, but also learning to live in a new reality where we need to honor strong site-based management with assistance and input from the district office.
Okay, directors want to rein us back in. Compensation is what we're here for tonight. Director Lemieux?
So could you tell us the difference in cost of having a sick leave bank versus what you are recommending in this? Because I heard great feedback on the 70%. I heard great feedback on the dental. I understand we give 6 days of mental health care for free for every single employee. We have really great benefits, but there's a notion that sick leave bank would be much better than any of those. So can you tell me the difference in cost between a sick leave bank, or is that something we can't discuss because we're being sued right now?
It might be helpful for us to flip back to the benefits page, Mr. Smith, and just in terms of the benefits that are listed. But the question being, do we have a cost for sick leave?
Can we discuss this given our current?
We sure can. No, I think the question is a fair one, and that is there a cost associated with restoring or putting a sick leave bank in these benefits, because those obviously you chose short-term disability as the primary benefit for employees that have those issues. So I think it's a fair question.
Good evening, directors. Thank you. So our former cost for the sick leave bank was 1.2 million.
1.2 million?
Correct. And so right now our short-term disability is about 500,000. In addition to having the short-term disability, the way that this works is employees have up to a maximum of 90 days. And if they need to, they can go on long-term disability. So they have benefits that supplement them for 90 days, and then they can go on long-term.
You want to introduce yourself, by the way?
Sorry, my name is Rosa Reynolds, and I'm the benefits manager.
Thank you, Ms. Reynolds. we assumed that you had some expertise for some reason.
Right into it. Apologize about that. Additionally, with that benefit, and we've had multiple employees that utilize it, it's called Workplace Possibilities. So it helps return our employees back to work. So it provides our employees things like desk modifications, bus seat upgrades, work equipment that they could use. And they come and they review what you have and how we can help our staff. So as part of having the short-term disability insurance, it helps our employees return to work, and it provides them a way to get back to work, because it's important not only for our staff, but for our students to see these employees back to work.
So in order to have a sick leave bank, we would need to look for another $1.2 million. Is that my understanding? Or
that's the total cost. So right now is about 500,000 short-term disability. This will take us up to about 700,000. So it would be a $500,000 difference to get up to the 1.2.
So an additional $500,000 is what it would take.
That's our estimate. We would obviously have to work through what that would look like.
Thank you. Dr. Tucker?
Was that the last question on the sick leave bank? Director Lemieux?
I think that was the only question.
Okay.
The cost of sick leave bank.
Did make a reference.
Yeah.
Okay, so that was the last part on the sick leave bank, right?
Correct.
Thanks.
All right.
I'm sorry, Mrs. Clemish, that I scared you to death with that question. But I think it's important that we talk about the costs of these things, and that is actually what went into your staff recommendation, I'm assuming, of why you wanted to do these, the benefits that you added. Was that a consideration, or I think those are incredible benefits.
I would say the change in short-term disability to 70% is to reflect that we want to cover our employees, again, that's not taxed, at a rate that would get them to a similar pay as what they would get from their salary without a buy-up option. In terms of other rationale, short-term disability or sick leave bank, looking to Mrs. Clemish, I would be more comfortable doing that in executive session given the situation that we are going through right now.
Very good.
So I think you raise an important point. Sick leave bank is not a non-tax kind of compensation. It is taxable, whereas the short-term disability is non-tax.
That's correct.
Okay. Director Lemieux?
Okay, so now I'm going to get into some questions that have come directly to me. We've already kind of answered them, but I just want to kind of touch on them one more time because nobody's seeing this in writing like the rest of us are. So the flat raise across, will there be, and again, you a little bit touched on it, but I just want to make sure people listening and people that are here that took time to come and listen, the flat raise that's being recommended, what will the impact to internal pay gaps be?
It is meant to not exacerbate them further.
Perfect, thank you. After, we've answered that one. So just to make it clear to everybody, does the 3.5% represent a 2.75% cost of living raise and then 0.75% to para, or is the raise 3.5% plus 0.75% to para?
No, the total raise is 3.5%, and that is based on the math of the budget. It is a coincidence that it also ties to what the inflation and para rates are, but that's why when we got there that we recommend it went to all employees because the numbers are so tight that we wanted to make sure that people didn't have an effective cut to pay or an actual cut to pay.
Very good.
So there is not an additional 0.75 coming.
So it's just the 3.5%.
5%.
Period.
Period.
And when you take the two and add them together, it's 3.5.
They're not added.
No.
You don't add those two together. So I think, I'm sorry. Mr. Smith.
Well, if I'm confused, I can imagine
No. So
8,100
it's
employees might
per-
be going.
Sure. Per state law, every employee's contribution rate is going from 8% to 8.75%, regardless. And then it's going to go to 9.5%, and then it's going to go to 10%. And then there are automatic adjusters in the Senate bill as well that are likely to hit because fourth quarter was poor. So our employees' para rate can go up to 12% over the course of a number of years. It's been at 8% for as long as anyone can remember. So this is the first year in the automatic changes, 8.75, 9, 5, 10. Then there's a possibility for up to 2% more in 0.5% increments a year for up to 4 years. So there are these auto adjusters so that they don't have to keep going back to the State House to say para's underfunded, para's overfunded. It goes both ways. This is the first one. Everyone is going to 8.75. Denver Metro inflation that's used in school finance is 2.7. So that is cost of living is 2.7. Contribution to retirement goes up another 0.75. The 3.5 is a coincidence that it's so close to that because that's what our budget could afford based on school finance right now. As I mentioned at the beginning, 2 weeks ago that number would have been 3%, and those numbers at the bottom wouldn't have changed. So they're independent of each other. It is a coincidence that they are so similar.
Okay. Thank you very much for explaining that. I don't necessarily actually still get it, but I'm going to trust you on that one. Because what I think I'm hearing is if we did a dollar amount raise for everybody, that's going to mess with their percentage of what they're actually getting. So that para mandated cost is going to become a problem for people who are in the higher bracket of what they owe for their para versus the ones who got that same flat amount and they can still cover that 0.75 of
Correct.
para. Okay, and that makes perfect sense to me. So that's one of the 4 options, and that's why that wasn't a good option. Because that's what somebody said to me, that it would be fair that everybody just gets the exact same amount. And so I promised him that I would ask the question, but I think if he's listening or listens to it later on archives, he'll be able to see that that actually would be harmful, especially to those in the higher group. Okay. And then one more, because I think it's important that people know, how much does it cost our district for every 1% of raise, including para?
About 3.7 million. If you remember a few years ago, that number was 3 million. The reason it's 3.7 is because we've been giving raises every year, including the 2 raises the last year. Our people are making more money. It costs more to give a 1% pay increase now.
And this is ongoing. This
Correct.
is not one-time bonus money.
Ongoing.
This is ongoing that will be reflective of everything for their retirement, or they won't get less next year. Awesome. So I appreciate that. Thank you very much.
So, Mr. Smith, I mean, certainly if we go back to the benefits of page of the costs that we're absorbing, I think roughly estimate that's about $2.6 some million that we're absorbing in just those premium costs. And so certainly another way to package this could have been, okay, employee, you absorb these costs and we'll give you a 4% or a 4.2% raise. So I think it's important for us to see that there's a pretty tight connection with this being an employee compensation increase as well, because we are absorbing those costs. So I just want to emphasize that. I do have a question about compression a little bit, and I know and I understand that certainly this increase was not intended to continue the progress that we've already made around compression. But I am curious, Ms. Chesla, how many teachers do we still have out there that are still victims of compression, that we still have not adequately resolved the compression problem for them?
That's a number that I don't have in my head right now. We know that the mill levy increases the tiered ones based on where people were in their pay range, helped to address the compression. But as I've said before, it was $14 million that we had available to use, and that was not nearly enough to fix the compression issues that we had. So there are still teachers who, are, as you say, are victims of compression, and we can do the research to get you those numbers.
So you know those numbers. So I mean, if we to give you some time, you could tell us that we have this many teachers that we still need to resolve for compression. Is that my understanding?
We'd probably need to put a pretty tight definition on what we're calling compression and put some parameters on the numbers at the top end and the bottom end. And once we do that, we could identify.
Okay. And tell me that. So if you were to give a definition of the worst case scenario of an employee that is a victim of compression, how would you define that?
We defined compression earlier as employees coming in with less experience and or lesser credentials coming in making the same as or more than someone who's been here longer or has better credentials.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So I'm just going to say, even though we know that we're not fixing that with our increase that's being recommended, I really think we need to get on top of that. I think I would want the board to be able to ask that question again in the future, and you be able to say, we have 200 teachers who are victims that we need to pay attention to. I would want to know that in the future.
We can look into that. And one thing I'd like you to know, for this school year, we eliminated all of the negotiating of salaries for incoming employees that was happening, where in the past we'd hear from a principal, you made an offer and the person's making $6,000 more where they're coming from, and we'd gather together and say, oh, we've got to get them, we'll give them $6,000 more, created compression. So we have held very, very, very firm this year to not doing that kind of negotiating in order to honor our employees who are here, who should not have compression catching up with them.
Glad to hear it. Mr. Smith, one final question from me to you is this the best we can do? Is this the absolute best that we can do in terms of for this coming school year to compensate our employees?
Yes, living inside of this year's revenue and all the changes meets this year's expenditures, this is the best we can do.
Very good, thank you. Director Lung?
Well, for the record, I just want you to tell the audience how many raises have this board given in the past years and what's the percentage. So for teacher, what is the total percentage have they got so far? If you could elaborate it to us. Sometimes I even forget myself, but I think it's important.
I have
to
some
tell
notes.
people again.
Okay, so if you'll bear with me while I check the notes, because we've done some pretty complex things in the last year. So for July of 18, I will start by saying that we also absorbed all of the medical insurance premium increases. That has not been captured as a percentage of an increase, but much like we've talked about tonight, it's a benefit for our employees for us to absorb the costs. So we'll start with that as a foundation. So last year, the overall increase for teachers was 3.2%, similar raise to what we're talking about right now. For the classified employees, it was still based on performance. So highly effective received 3.2%, effective received 2.8%, partially effective received 0.75%, and ineffective, of course, received nothing. So there was some differentiation among the employee groups there. Then let's talk about the pay freeze increases for those who were eligible. We know that we provided an increase of 2% per year frozen of the salary at the time of the freeze for licensed employees, which averaged out to about 4.8% for those eligible. I won't tell you that it was for everyone. It was for those who are eligible. Later on, we caught up the classified employees by doing a 1.5% increase on current salary for each year frozen, which came out to a very close amount to what was done for licensed staff, just in an easier way to deliver. So again, for those eligible, they received that. Then we can get to the MLO increases. For classified staff, they got 5%. If they were in a hard-to-fill position, they could have gotten more than 5% as we work to address the external equity issues for some of our classified positions and deal with our hard-to-fill positions where we had many, many vacancies and needed to do something rapidly for those. For the licensed staff, I referred earlier to those tiered raises that we worked on trying to deal with the compression issues. So licensed staff received anywhere from 1% to 6% out of the MLO, depending on where they sat in their salary range. School-based administrators received 3.5%. District administrators, excluding cabinet, I always have to say that, also received 3.5%.
All right, board, any further discussions before we let these guys take a break and sit down? Director Holtzman, final question, then we'll let you guys take a break for a moment and we'll engage in some discussion.
So I know we're talking about next year, but some of the most important work we'll do over the course of next year is going to be through our consultant that we've hired, expert, has done this for 40 years, has worked with all our neighboring districts, and working in conjunction with our employee council. I guess I am asking for it now, but it may not be ready now. But I would like to see a detailed timeline about some of the tasks that they'll be completing, like, for instance, the identification of compression. We already know about transcripts. That's, so not only just concrete tasks, but, this is what we are needing to know, or this is the research that we have, and this is why we're looking at it. And just have it out there, just like Mr. Smith is going to put all of this information out. I'm assuming it'll be on the employee council page. If we could also get that out there, and also just asking, and I know Ms. Thompson's not here, but is the employee council meeting enough? It looks like they're meeting about once a month. This is one of the most important tasks that we need to have completed and done well over the next year. If that needs to be happening on a more regular basis, I would just like to have that evaluated. So,
very good.
One of the results of the Monday employee council meeting was the discussion of putting out a timeline, much like a flow chart. That's the words that were used to pull together the tasks that need to be done. Right now, we're pretty overwhelmed with collecting the transcripts to find out where we are, because we don't know where we are. Happy news today, this afternoon, we're up to 59% of teachers who've provided us with their transcripts. So that's a huge increase from the last time I reported to you. But the flow chart idea from the employee council will be coming, so you'll see the tasks and a timeline.
Mr. Smith, do we have a slide that just summarizes your recommendations? Can we just have that projected?
Yes, we do. And while Mr. Knight's getting there, Director Holtzman, I will add, Colleen is a wizard in Excel and calculated your question. We're anticipating 86% of our budget into salaries and benefits this year.
Thank you, Colleen. We're going to let you guys have a seat, and don't go very far. Dr. Tucker?
Yes. Mr. Smith, we didn't talk about the dental benefit as well. Can you talk about that as well?
Actually, I'd like to ask Mrs. Reynolds to talk about the dental.
And if you can go back to the sheet that has all.
Yes.
I was just taking a little break. The dental benefit. So if you have a child that's under the age of 13, fillings, everything's going to be covered. Before, if your child had a broken tooth, you'd be paying out of pocket until you met the deductible. And now with our plan on Delta Dental Premier, that'll be paid for on your behalf. And if any of you have had dental work or kids with dental work, it's expensive. So this is a huge benefit for our staff.
And how much is absorbed by the board?
How much is
the total will be absorbed?
100%. So
at a cost of
$165,000. Yes.
Okay.
Dr. Vogel.
Just to follow up on that, I know Director Lemieux mentioned the mental health benefit and what's available to staff. Can you explain that a little bit?
Sure. So every medical plan does have a mental health benefit, but we also have the employee assistance program. And what that is 6 sessions per issue per year. So essentially that could mean is that one time you go in for anxiety, that's one issue. You then go again for depression, that's another issue. So you could potentially be having 12 sessions for free a year.
Dr. Lemieux?
Do board directors have access to that?
Depends.
No, really. All right, very good. Feel free to have a seat there in the front row, folks. So board director, so basically this is the recommendation before us, and I'll just lead off with a few thoughts. First of all, when we placed Scott Smith in the CFO role, we got a man who really understood that we can't have these huge variances. We can't put money in contingency like crazy, that we have to direct as much money to staff and salary. So I will just say that when he says to us, looked at it, I know what the state's doing, this is the best we can do, it has a lot of clout for me. Is it the best? No. I mean, is it the best in terms of what we would want to have happen? But when he says this is what the budget can handle, and our responsibility ultimately is to make sure that we're good fiscal stewards of what comes into this district, and that we're good stewards in terms of being responsible what we can pay out. And so I would just lead off by saying that I have a great deal of trust in the recommendation. I think we beat it pretty clearly that we still are not at the place where we want to be in terms of staff collaboration when these kind of things hit us. But I also want to echo what Director Vogel said, is that we caused this as a board. We said, you know what? We want to know, we want to be able to give out contracts, we want their compensation on the contracts. It was the first time we've done that. That's happened in several years. It's the first time that we've had a day where every building has been talking about compensation at the same time. And even though we're hard on our folks about saying we want more, we want collaboration, I think we have to applaud our folks for the efforts that they've made and the timeline that we pushed them into to say, we want this special meeting, we want to know it now, we want contracts to have the compensation on it, and that's what's caused these special meetings to occur. It was never the intent to blindside or make it secret, or that was none of the factors. It truly was based on a timeline that we were holding the staff to. So I'm satisfied with what we've heard. I think staff is very clear about our desires moving forward, what collaboration should look like, what we're expecting for this future structure for compensation. We have to deal with the compression issue. I am tired of talking about that issue, to be honest with you, and I want to know. I want to know, Ms. Chesla, I want to know a number. I want to know that we can put a goal and say, we've got 200 employees that we need to work on, and let's get it done. And we need to look at, again, as a board, if there's some creative ways that we can do in addition to this to make that happen. So those are some general comments that I would make. What other thoughts, board directors, would you like to make? Director Chancho Shore?
As I was adding up, Ms. Chesla, thank you, and in heels for that whole time too. Congratulations. I was adding that up. It was anywhere between, at the low end, 10% to 21% this year. In 2 years' time, in raises and including medical costs and pay freeze and all of those things. So I just want to put back out there. I understand that we have issues with reaching the limits of what everyone else is doing around us, and we're trying to catch up, and we're working at it as hard as we possibly can, but anywhere between 10 and 20% is unheard of anywhere in the state of Colorado for raises at this time in a 2-year time. So I just want that out there too.
Director Vogel.
So I guess my thoughts are, and I appreciate all the work that everybody's done on this, because we got a mess to fix for sure. And I feel really good about the direction that we're going. I didn't hear any compelling argument against doing this other than the fact that we need to have a CBA in place. And given the fact that that's not our current state and that's not what we're making a decision about right now, I don't see any reason that we wouldn't approve this. That's my thought.
Other thoughts? Director Lung?
Well, although we always can improve, but the fact is that there are pay freeze in school years 2009, 2010, and 2011. After that, the Peers Board have a pay system based on performance starting on 2012 school years. And they pay teacher that's hard to get much higher. And also it depends, and they kind of arbitrarily, getting our staff into 4 different categories. So that aggravate the pay problems that we have in the school district. the reason I'm bringing this up is it takes years to get to the point where we have new hire that may earn equal or more than experienced teacher. I personally treasure loyalty. And I think this board is trying our best to solve the problems. But we have to look at the historical perspective and see why we get here. It doesn't get here in 1 year. It get here for the past 6 or 7 years. So we hired a great man to be in this job, Dr. Tucker, but he came in last July 1st, okay? And after that, he has accomplished so much for this school district, including leading us to pass the meal levy and bond, which we have money to even talk about, giving you raise today. So, although there's a lot we could do, but looking at the historical perspective and what we have accomplished since Dr. Tucker is here, so I just let people know that these compensations, recommendations, it may not be perfect, although we could always get better input. But I myself feel that this is a great plan based on the historical perspective and what we have so far.
Director Graziano?
I mean, not to perseverate, but to quickly perseverate. I just want to thank everybody who, again, because this is kind of like we pushed to get to this and wanted to have it done, which was kind of setting a precedent to make this available so that everyone in the staff knew the amounts that were going to be in there. So thanks a lot for turning this around. I agree. I think, this it's not perfect right now, but I think over the course, as Ms. Chesler outlined, the number of raises that have been received, the work that Dr. Tucker has gotten underway, the beginnings of the employee council, I think show an amazing path forward for this. So I am really, pleased with what staff came up for this. And like President Ray said earlier, when Scott, CFO Smith looks us in the eye and said, this is what we can do, I fully buy into that based on the work he has done to in the district around handling the finances of what we're doing. So.
And to you too, Colleen. We don't want to leave you out of the mix because we know you're the one that makes him look good. So we appreciate that as well. All right. Any other discussions? Any other comments, board members, you would like to make before we need to move to a motion for this recommendation that's up on the slide? Any other comments before we do that? Then I'd like to comment or a motion.
I'd just like to comment and say I know I've been really hard publicly on people. And I want to apologize for that because what I said was not how I feel. I know that you all have worked hard. HR, our benefits department, and our budget department have worked your tails off to get this. And I think it's fair. I think it's kind. I think it's respectful. I think it honors our employees. And I think the work that this board does also honors our employees. And so while it's hard to hear that we still continue to have challenges, I think we're at a place that we can celebrate every now and then. And right now I'm feeling really emotional because I want to celebrate this because it deserves celebration. We have worked really hard to get here. And I'm just going to leave it at that. So I just want to say thank you. And if I did anything publicly that hurt anybody sitting in this room or Amanda, and I'll talk to her later, it was very unintentional. So thank you guys for the hard work that you've done.
So since we don't have a resolution in front of us, I'm going to read the slide as a resolution, and that the staff is recommending that we provide all regular staff a 3.5% ongoing pay raise, that we absorb all medical and dental health benefit premium increases, we increase STDI coverage to 70% for all employees, enhance dental benefits, and absorb the para-employer contribution rate increase. Is there a motion?
I want to have a motion.
I'm sorry?
I raised the motion.
So Director Long motions that we accept this recommendation. Is there a second? Yeah. Seconded by Holtzman. Any further discussion? Seeing none, let's vote. Chancho Shore.
Aye.
Graziano.
Aye.
Holtzman.
Aye.
Lemieux.
Aye.
Lung.
Aye.
Ray, aye, and Vogel.
Aye.
Okay, that motion passes unanimously. That ends our special meeting. Again, staff, thank you for your time and efforts. And
Move to adjourn.
we have a motion to adjourn by Director Vogel. Is there a second?
Second.
Seconded by Lemieux and Chancho Shore. Let's vote. Chancho Shore. Graziano. Holtzman. Lemieux. Lung. Ray, I, and Vogel. Meeting adjourned.